So the way that Bitcoin is being developed is through open source. All the code is open source for the Bitcoin clients. You can go on GitHub right now and look at all the code through Bitcoin. You can send in your submissions to the Bitcoin core developers and ask for different parts of the Bitcoin code to be improved. So the updates of Bitcoin is a community-run effort. Anybody can volunteer their time and improve the code. Here on the screen is actually a list of contributors to the Bitcoin code, listed in order of contributions, how many commits they've made. And this goes on for, there's probably been a couple hundred people, 200-300 people, that have individually improved the code. There's also a process called the Bitcoin Improvement Proposals, BIPs for short. And this is how people make their suggestions of, similar to a product roadmap in an organization. People suggest, well, we want this new feature into Bitcoin. We're providing a proposal of how it should be done. And the community itself decides on, well, what do we work on next? What's the next thing to work on in the code? So you can see it's a community-driven initiative. And one of the nice things about it being open source is anybody can go and take the code, copy it, make a few adjustments here and there, and create their own currency, like Litecoin. So a few years ago in 2011, Charles Lee, he created Litecoin. And all he did was take the Bitcoin code and tweak a few different parts here and there. So with Bitcoin, there's a coin limit of 21 million. He changed his currency to 84 million. And the average block time, so right now with Bitcoin, it's about every 10 minutes a new block is added. Well, with Litecoin, it's every 2.5 minutes. And just like that, probably about 4 or 5 hours of work, he created a new currency and launched it and called it Litecoin. So you can imagine since then, if it's so easy to create your own currency, a lot of other people have created their own monetary recipes for their own currencies. Maybe Bitcoin isn't the right answer. Maybe some other currency is. So we have Litecoin. We also have Dogecoin. Dogecoin has a few different differences as well. I think it's an average block time of about a minute. And a community actually grew around it. They became involved in running different charitable events all around this currency. Darkcoin. The IRS, the feds, all these guys are not too impressed with Darkcoin because they've changed around a lot of how the blockchain works in Darkcoin to make every transaction even more anonymous. So there's also these concepts called alt chains. Instead of it being a separate coin, a separate currency, it takes the technology, the blockchain technology, of being a decentralized ledger, and instead using it as a decentralized database. So for example, Namecoin, when you register a domain name, maybe you'll do it through GoDaddy, and then they registered through this international organization called ICANN. And it's one centralized database, one centralized authority that decides who owns this domain name. Well, what if we decentralize that? And that's what Namecoin is. So that's why it's called an alt chain. And of course, Ethereum. We've heard this a lot. Smart contracts and the decentralization of contracts. So being able to decide who owns a title to this house. Or there was even a marriage done onto the blockchain. Well, what if you can decentralize titles to different things? So we can get more into smart contracts. You'll hear a lot about it in the future. And you can imagine there's quite a lot going on. There's hundreds of new altcoins. There's alt chains coming out. We caught up with Tim Swanson to talk more about how these new altcoins and alt chains are going to be affecting our lives.
My name is Tim Swanson. I do business development and research at Melodic. Melodic is a digital asset platform that has tools for exchanges, for converting assets, for companies to enable digital assets onto their own platform and their own companies. So what is Ethereum and what is a smart contract? So Ethereum, on paper, in theory, is both a language, a programming language, and a platform to enable developers to create decentralized applications. And depending on what phase they are talking about, they also hope to do, for example, compute and storage. Just so the audience understands what a smart contract is, it's a tool, it's an algorithm, it's a protocol to enable human interactions without humans, essentially. At least in this Bitcoin world, we're talking about bilateral exchange of contracts that can execute their own terms, so it bypasses the need for supposedly a middleman. The reason why you have a lot of different altcoins, there's three primary reasons, and I don't think that these will ever go away because they're economic incentive issues. The first is ASIC depreciation. So the way mining, at least hash-based proof-of-work mining works with most of these chains is you have, at least SHA and now script-based, is you have a little machine that only has a profitability window for about 3 to 4 minutes. But what that means is it has a certain amount of labor, fixed labor, but then the rest of the network is adding competitive labor force, if you will, right, to extract this unit of coin. And what happens is, at least what's happened in the last 4 years with Bitcoin essentially is you've had this gigantic S-curve, if you will. That's actually what it is. It's technologically an S-curve in hash rate. And we're actually seeing right now with price, for example, difficulty rating staying the same because you've had this equilibrium taking place between what is capable of the hash rate versus what is actually economically viable to actually extract. Anyways, the idea is if you have these labor units and they're no longer profitable, what do you do with them? So you either sell them to someone else who thinks they could be profitable with them, or you make your own altcoin, which can still use that. And as a result, I think what we'll find once lawsuits take place and subpoenas take place is some of these altcoins that were kind of scammy were essentially backed by miners themselves. The second reason that we have all these alts is because there's no one to pay developers, period. Like, Bitcoin itself is just basically a public goods problem. There's no CEO to either fire you, but there's also no CEO to hire you and pay you to actually develop on the protocol. So as a result, if you have scarce talent, who's going to pay you to actually work on it? Well, these developers that know how to do this stuff, they're like, well, I can make an alt, pay myself with some of the coin. And so there's always going to be that incentive. And the third reason that we have altcoins is because with Bitcoin itself, you basically have had a plateauing of features that have been integrated because nobody wants to damage the protocol accidentally and destroy those assets. So what's happened is they've effectively outsourced all the innovation to these alt chains. So Litecoin, it was created in October 2011 by a guy named Charlie Lee, who's now over at Coinbase. He was a Google engineer at the time, and the two biggest differentiations with Litecoin is Charlie basically changed the block timing from 10 minutes. It's actually, there's no such thing as 10 minutes. It's actually a bell curve because it's an inhomogeneous Poisson process. So on average, it's 10 minutes. With Litecoin, it's 2.5 minutes. And so that means there's 4 times basically created because it uses the same exact reward schedule. So it'll be 84 versus 21 million created in the long term. The second thing is he used a different type of hash function for the proof of work. Instead of using SHA-256D, he used something called script or script, which is supposedly more memory intensive, or memory exhaustive, if you will. And as a result, it was designed supposedly to be ASIC resistant, and that didn't actually live up to the claim. But Charlie spent apparently a few hours just tweaking the code, organizing it, and then he launched it. Darkcoin incorporates something called CoinJoin in a feature called DarkSend. CoinJoin was created last year in 2013 by Greg Maxwell, and he wanted to create a way to mix coins to remove the linkability of history. So essentially, you have some kind of anonymity built into it, so that way people can't find what you bought previously, can't see where that asset came from. So Darkcoin incorporates this thing called DarkSend, which is CoinJoin. And the reason governments don't like this is because they want to actually be able to trace with anti-money laundering laws the flow of funds. So you see this happening, especially in the headlines today about AML KYC compliance in the space. Maxcoin is named after a guy named Max Kaiser, who's a New York resident living in London who has a whole lot of hyperbola on his TV show on Russia Today. And so he just says, he's like zero hedge on TV, basically. He just says stuff to get people's attention. And he created this coin. It was launched in early February. And it used a different hash function called Kachek, which was approved a couple years ago during some contest with NIST. Anyways, the idea with that was, oh, this could be another for the people coin because it could be CPU mined only. But if you actually look at how it was released and developed and so on, it looks like a classic pump. I'm not saying that was their intention. Maybe it was. I don't own any, and obviously there's a lot of bag holders, if you will, left holding those assets. I know that they're still supposedly developing. His Twitter feed's active, or the MaxCoin Twitter feed's active. And if you actually look at the hash rate, it continues to fall. So what is Dogecoin? How did it become a charity coin? Okay, so started back early December last year in 2013. Billy Marcus, and he's a programmer in Oregon, and he was kind of joking around apparently on social media along with Jackson Palmer. They were talking about this idea of taking this meme, this Doge, which is, if the viewers aren't familiar, there's this dog called a Shiba Inu that's really cute, but had this like particular face, and it became this internet sensation, this meme. And so what Jackson basically did is he created this website, Dogecoin.com. He made put this cartoon version of it on top of a coin, and then Billy actually coded it together. They wanted to have this fun currency that wasn't tied to Bitcoin's sordid history with Silk Road and stuff like that. And what ended up happening is it took off for whatever reason. And I actually would call it a traction channel coin. And the reason I would call it this is because what's happened with Bitcoin and Litecoin is they've essentially saturated the demographic, the certain clientele that actually want that particular coin for ideological reasons or whatever. So, and you see this on social media. It's the interest and awareness of those coins have continue maybe to grow, but adoption is completely flatlined. And conversely, Dogecoin, at least during this time frame, or this past winter and spring, it attracted some new people, including women. Like when I bring my wife around to meetups and stuff like that, she's usually the token female. And what Dogecoin did, and this is how I described it. I have a friend who works in the financial district up in San Francisco, and he's like, so what is Dogecoin? I was like, well, imagine if you went to a bar and you're with your friends, and one of your friends helps you, talk with these women. He's kind of your wingman. And he's like, oh, so Dogecoin, since it brings new demographics to these conventions, it's the wingman currency. And so I'm not sure if I'd call it that, but I would definitely call it a traction channel currency, because if you look at each of these chains as a type of startup, they need to attract adoption and users. And Doge was able to do that, and they did that through 3 different fundraising events. The first one was the Jamaican bobsled team. They held a fundraiser. The community donated some money to send the Jamaican bobsled team to the Winter Olympics. The second one was some people from the Dogecoin Foundation did a fundraiser for a project in Kenya for a water project. It was called Doge for Water, and they raised, I think it was like $15,000, somewhere around there. And then the third one was this past spring around May. There was a fundraising effort to sponsor a NASCAR at Talladega, and the driver was Joss Wise. And anyways, they raised enough money to get their logo and stuff like that on this car in front of new people. What is mega coins and what is proof of sweat? Yes. So apparently, according to one article on CoinDesk, there was 3 Serbian guys who put together this project, and it was actually, if you look at the Twitter feed, it was actually tweeted back in July, but didn't catch anyone's attention until August. And that's this year, 2014. The idea was this: you download an app on your phone, and you walk around all day. And what this does is, after you've walked around all day, you sync up with their server, and they'll give you up to 10 coins. And so the idea was it's supposed to incentivize people to move around and create sweat, proof of sweat. But there's 2 drawbacks to this. Number one, it can be gamed. Basically, people apparently put them on their washing machine or dryer, and it's continuously moving. I'm not sure if I'd want to put it on my dryer, obviously, because of the heat. But the other issue then is it's centralized. We don't know the distribution. Like, are they keeping a lot of coins for themselves? Will they cheat you with the amount of coins? So it's a fun new way of trying to actually integrate proof of work with a proof of work. So yeah, what are people doing with altcoins? Based on the actual blockchain behavior, they buy, sell on exchanges, typically just to hodl or hodling. That's just to store forever, essentially. And then some use them as mixing coins, essentially. They'll throw Bitcoin in one exchange and then take Litecoin out, making it difficult for law enforcement. Why did these people get married on a blockchain? So there was a project called BitNation, and one of the advisors to the project was a guy named David Mondras, and to kind of build up PR and hype for it, he got married to his existing wife. They've already been married for. So what they were trying to show is, hey, this blockchain can be used for permanence, for timestamping of events. Proof of work, or at least hash-based proof of work, what we're used to in this community, requires certain resources. So the idea of creating this hash rate, this proof that you are working through hash rate, is to prevent Sybil attacks from taking place. It's to make it economically expensive to attack the network and create a double spend. That costs real resources. Proof of stake was invented or came up with by a guy named Quantum Mechanic in July 2011, and then Manny Rosenfeld. And the idea was, hey, we could reduce the capital cost required to secure this network by a different method. And their actual designs were actually a hybrid of proof of work and proof of stake. And to give you an example of kind of how proof of stake works, let's look at NXT. Again, I'm not necessarily endorsing the project, but the idea is anyone who actually has coins in their client, it's called stake, essentially. You have stake in the network, and the more stake you have, the higher chances you have of being the next validator, if you will. So like every minute, the network basically assigns somebody to be the next validator of the blocks. Yep. And what happens is that actually, since everyone on the network knows who's going to be next, they don't need to have, in theory, as much security on the network. You don't need to have this massive hash rate to prevent Sybil attacks. In practice, though, all pure proof of stake systems have become centralized in some manner. Like PureCoin, for example, which is one of the first ones, they have the development team actually signs each block. We've also learned what not to do. So, for example, an example Charlie Lee mentions in his presentations is something called Geistgeld, which was a coin back in 2011 that had 15-second block times. Basically, they took Bitcoin, forked it, had 15-second block times versus 10 minutes. What they found is that was too fast for the network to propagate an actual block. And consequently, miners left that network because they continually were unable to hear the next block and were working on it simultaneously, thus creating an orphan and not being rewarded for that. And so it became very insecure. So we've learned that in a decentralized manner, there might actually be a lower bound limit for, at least based on this proof of work mechanism. Another thing we've learned not to do is block rewards issues, or we've learned what some of the issues are with block rewards. There's a early adopter named Ray Dillinger. He was actually on the original Metz-Dowd cryptography list with Satoshi. He's still around today, and what he's been doing is he's been kind of analyzing, like, why do altcoins die? And what he's found, the primary culprit is block rewards. Essentially, with Bitcoin, for example, every 4 years, the block reward, the seigniorage reward, if you will, decreases by half every 4 years. From 50 to 25 to 12 and a half, and so on. And same thing with many of these, all these proof of work chains essentially have the same monetary supply with an asymptote and stuff like that. And what he's found is if a chain doesn't double in value at the same time as it splits in half, you have miners leave. Some non-monetary chains I think are interesting are Factom, Filecoin, SkuChain, and Artcoa. Essentially what they're doing is they're tracking notary services in a sense. They can track titles and registries and provenance of an asset. And Artcoa, for example, if you look at the art world, you have an asset, the art, but then you also have value in who owned it previously, the pedigree. And that's in an analog world right now. So the question is can you digitize that and put it in a place that it can't be corrupted and can last for a long time. So they're looking at, can they use a blockchain to do this? SkuChain, similar idea with supplies. For example, they want to get Pfizer all the way down to the end user being able to use a token. There's no monetary value to this token, but each token represents a unit within these packages, these pharmaceuticals to the end user. And supposedly, in theory, you'll be able to track back to see where the shenanigans took place. A couple other projects that are interesting. One's called Folding Coin and Gridcoin. There are these distributed computing projects from Stanford and Berkeley that allow users globally to basically fold proteins to try and cure cancer, but they're not rewarded for this. And so what Folding Coin and Gridcoin want to do is they want to give coins to people that are participating in this project, and they could be redeemable.